back in the old days, everybody already knows that I'm a geezer. I like to say boomer, but I'm a geezer in the making. And I grew up during a time when cameras actually had film in them. Well, hello there. I am Cool Gray, and this is Cool Gray in Studio A. Welcome back to the podcast. We are in episode 5. I say that with a little surprise in my voice because, wow, 5 episodes. I'm actually making this thing happen, and I'm so glad you're along for the ride. If you're joining me for the first time, we are actually in part 4 of my first series. It's called Creativity Born of Trauma, and I would certainly encourage you to go back to the first episode, listen to the introduction, and then in episode 2, we begin this series. So we are just now passing the halfway point. There will be 2 more guests in this series coming up next time, 2 weeks from now, which I believe is Thanksgiving Day. You'll hear my conversation with Emma Nottage, an absolutely delightful human being and a music tutor who will talk about how she uses music to inspire creativity and to facilitate healing in the people that she works with. And then we're going to wrap up this series with a very talented artist and a very dear friend of mine for well over 30 years. Pat Lewis will be with us 2 weeks after that. Then we're going to take a short break and be back in 2023 with the second series called Personal Paranormal Encounters. You do not want to miss a minute of any of that. In this episode today, we're going to be talking with Nomar Slevik. You'll hear more about him in just a few minutes, and then you'll actually hear from him. There are, by the way, just a few minor audio glitches in this particular episode. For some reason, Zoom did not like Nomar's side of the conversation quite as much as it liked mine, but it doesn't in any way inhibit your opportunity to understand what Nomar is sharing with us, and it's well worth listening to. So do stay tuned. I am trying to keep these episodes to just an hour or slightly under. So for that reason, I'm going to stop talking right now. I've already shared with you everything you need to know at this moment, and we're going to get right into this conversation. So I'll be right back after this very short break with Nomar Slevik. Hey, Cool Gray here. I want to talk to you for just a minute about Patreon. Patreon is a social media platform where you can support this podcast, my YouTube channel, and other artists who are doing what I'm doing, which is making stuff happen on our own dime, on our own time. This is a way that you can support those efforts. And if you're enjoying this podcast, I would encourage you to join me over there, not just because it helps me, but there are perks, people. Let me tell you what those are. At the very first tier of support, just $5 a month, you will get 24-hour advance access to every single episode in its audio format. At the $10 level and above, you will get a full video version of every single episode. That is not available anywhere else. Why is that amazing? Well, you'll be able to learn such things as, what do my guests even look like, especially when they're talking? Did I apply my eyeliner evenly? Am I wearing the same outfit as I was last episode? Do I have broccoli in my teeth? These are the things that are burning in your souls. I know you want to know the answers, and that's where you can find out. If you're not feeling goofy, I can also tell you that you'll get exclusive access to bonus content, not available anywhere else, monthly minisodes, and quarterly blooper reels. I am also offering fan access. You can make requests. You can say, hey, Cool Gray, make a minisode about this, or why don't you talk about that? And I will listen to you. I may not actually do it, but I will listen to you. I am doing everything that you see here, from the writing to the editing to the recording to the promotion to the graphics. It's all me by myself, and I'm just really trying to cover my costs. I would love to welcome you over there to become a part of this exclusive community that gets all the nifty stuff that the rest of you are missing out on. So come on over to patreon.com, find me as Cool Gray Studios. There's a link in the show notes that will take you there more directly, and I thank you for considering that. I'd like to introduce my guest today. Author Nomar Slevik has been fascinated by all things paranormal since childhood, beginning with a UFO encounter at 4 years old. Because of that experience, his life's passion has been to research, investigate, write, and share UFO and extraterrestrial encounters from everyday people in a way that conveys the human element of profoundly strange encounters. Some of his works include the books Granite Skies, Otherworldly Encounters, and UFOs over Maine. His podcast, I Want to Believe, co-hosted with his best friend, Kyle Sawyer, covers a range of paranormal encounters. Nomar, welcome to the podcast. I'm really glad you're here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, I happen to know that bio doesn't cover all of the ways that you create, does it?
That's true.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about some of your music and anything else about your creative expressions that you haven't mentioned yet?
Sure. Really, it's just music, and I got into music probably around the same time as the paranormal. Not creating music, but just like discovering it and understanding that you can hear something audibly, and it can be soothing. It can make your imagination run wild. It can make you sad. It can make you, aggressive. The fascination with music and really like audio in general, like I loved watching movies, and I thought it was just really like I didn't know what it was called at the time, but sound design within a movie was just really fascinating to me. So as I got older and started getting into hip hop, listening to hip hop, you can almost hear how the music is getting constructed, whether the track starts with a sample or with a bass line or with some drums or something. It almost gives you the building blocks to be like, I might be able to figure this out and figure out how to put some of these things together, as opposed to, a big heavy metal band or something, and that just sounds really layered and really complicated, and it involves instruments, and I've never known how to play an instrument. I have keyboards and stuff, but I just kind of play it by ear. So that seemed like something that was out of my realm of being able to do anything with. But hip hop, I was like, it's constructed in a way that makes sense to my brain, or I don't know if it's like that just in general, but that's how it worked for me. I would listen to these songs, and all I had was like a boombox recorder. So I would try doing these little mixes by, playing a cassette in one and recording in the other, or get a little snippet from the radio and record that onto the tape and then splice it in with, a sample from a hip hop song that I liked, and trying to kind of make my own little mixes, if you will. And that just kind of started to snowball to the point where I eventually, while I was in high school, I ended up having a keyboard and a sampler. And I really wanted a drum machine. I didn't have one, but the sampler can work as a drum machine. So my high school years were just really trying to figure out that sampler and how I could kind of play it like a drum machine, and then rewind it, and then sample new things, and then play over that and record it on top of it, to layer. And it was quite the learning curve. There wasn't a YouTube tutorial at that time. So I was just kind of learning as I was going, and I'd make these tapes with beats and I'd play them for my friends, and they're like, oh man, this stuff's awesome. And, we're just having a good time with it. And when I started going to college and started acquiring more like used gear to make music, it just kind of evolved, and I ended up having 4 tracks, 8 tracks, drum machines, samplers, and just continue to develop making music. And it was such a good coping mechanism. If I was stressed out, I just throw on some headphones, start making some beats, and it didn't solve an issue, but it let me know that I was going to be okay in this moment. I didn't have to have suicidal ideation. I didn't have to think about what my next move might have to be in my personal life. All that mattered was the rhythm that was in my ears at that moment, and it was enough to get me through so I could kind of calm down.
That sounds like a very immersive experience. So it doesn't
Absolutely.
It doesn't leave room for anything to intrude. It's very much like back in the old days. Everybody already knows that I'm a geezer. I like to say boomer but I'm a geezer in the making. And
Okay.
I grew up during a time when cameras actually had film in them. And
Yeah.
you could take that film out very carefully and you could go into a dark room and you could process that film. And once you were involved in that process, you were in this closed environment in the dark, working so intensely with things that needed your full attention. 12 hours would go by and you'd have
Yeah.
no idea. I imagine it
Yeah.
was a similar experience for you.
Yeah. Very, very similar. That sounds just as immersive.
Yeah. And it
And
sounds it sounds to me like the process for you of creating the beats was more what it was about for you was the creation of it and the experience of doing it rather than the end product and
oh
having it
yeah.
be heard or having it be published. For you, the making of the music was the thing. Is
Yeah.
that a right read?
It's a very right read. It was the process, the journey, whatever you want to call it. And I just want to point out that it wasn't to push my problems aside and not deal with them. It was to be okay enough to when I was finally in a place where I felt calmer, I can make rational decisions. I could then go back to the problems and try to attack
Sure.
them better.
Yeah. Well, I may have mentioned to you, I know I've mentioned it in a previous episode. So, to my audience, if you're hearing this for the second time, not sorry. It's part of my story and I tell it whenever I have a chance. The reason I'm podcasting turns out, I didn't know it at the time, but to be the same reason that I started a YouTube channel 6 years ago. Both of those things happened on the back end of a trauma where I had a formal PTSD diagnosis both times. And it was when I was talking about this irresistible urge to start podcasting out of the blue, just, I think, less than 60 days after losing my brother. I had a therapist that said, did it ever occur to you that these creative outlets are actually a trauma response? And it hadn't occurred to me. But the moment she said it, I knew that's exactly what I was doing. And I just had no awareness of that. And once I realized it, I decided to embrace it and go with it, which is why this first series is exactly about that. And I'm delighted to find that I'm not alone in this. So many of
Yeah.
us, through creative expression, are finding ways to cope. And yes, I'm not escaping dealing with my grieving process. It's still very fresh for me. But during the time that I'm doing this, I can redirect my focus because part of PTSD for me has a lot to do with intrusive thoughts and imagery that I can't get control of. So just to force those to be on the back burner for a period of time so my brain can breathe
Yeah.
makes it easier for me to tolerate those moments on the other side. It sounds like you're talking about something very similar.
Yeah. It sounds very similar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So is it still that kind of music that you're most interested in making?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's certainly that then the whole music process that then did eventually snowball to where I was releasing a lot of music, and I did that for a bunch of years. I ended up performing my music and doing a lot of really fun stuff with it. I think through my tenure of doing that, there might have been like 20 albums that I released over the
Oh,
years.
wow.
But during that whole process, my other parallel love along the way with music was and is the paranormal. So while I was, putting out albums and things like that, I was also researching.
Mm-hmm.
I was really, really interested in things that happened in my home state of Maine. So it was kind of like a dual process. If I was kind of stuck musically, or when a project was done, there was an emptiness and a sadness in that process being over. Just the ending of a project
You have to
was
grieve it. Yeah.
troubling. Yeah. So it was really cool to have this other thing to fall back on. And I didn't even know at the time that I was creating these coping mechanisms along the way. And I kind of wish I didn't get in my own way and also self medicate in ways that I wish I didn't in my past. Because I think I had a pretty good system for what I was doing. I just wasn't 100% aware that that was what I was doing,
Sure.
as aware as I am now.
I have never found regret to be a particularly useful tool for anything.
No.
Not a single one of us can change a thing about our past.
Yeah.
So it's really about continuing to keep our eyes set forward. Um,
Yeah, I've really embraced like the whole do better hashtag, if you will, for lack of a better term.
mhm.
But I want to do better. Like if I screw something up just personally, I want to learn from it and grow. Or if I've been hanging out with somebody and they have this really amazing thought process or something, I want to absorb and learn and grow and utilize things from everywhere to try to keep doing better. Embracing that over the last 5, 6, 7 years, well, I guess to step back a little bit, I struggle with anxiety and depression, and I'll be having the best day, and then a wave of depression will just wash over you, and there's no rhyme or reason. And the best thing I can do is to hopefully cope, but a lot of it is being in a dark room, and distracting myself with something that I like. Anyways, the point is that I wanted to make sure that I'm in a place where I'm not spiraling out of control to the point where I think suicide's a good idea. I still think about it, but it's almost never a good idea anymore. And that's like a big deal. To have that thought not be a good idea is amazing and really good progress for me. And I think it'll be an even better day when I don't think about it every day. So it's
Well,
baby steps, and I'm still in the process.
I have something to say about that, Nomar. I
Sure.
mentioned a few minutes ago that I lost my brother recently, and I lost him to suicide.
Wow.
And it runs
Okay.
in my family. We've lost four family members, and we nearly lost me. I've had a nearly successful attempt in the early 90s. Obviously, I
Jeez.
was not successful
Yeah.
at that.
Thank
And
goodness.
anybody watching on video, I have my semicolon tattoo that I got this right after my brother passed, as just my way of saying, we're not putting any more periods at the end of these sentences. We really need for the story to continue. Thinking about not being here anymore is also, in a way, a coping mechanism, in my view. Unless you're actively making a plan,
Right.
thinking about maybe things would be better if I weren't here, it honestly doesn't count. And I'm saying this because it's been said to me by professionals, and I was a grief counselor for several years. And a lot of the time, when we're missing somebody that we've lost, or we're processing a traumatic event, or we're going through any level of emotional pain, we're built to avoid pain and seek pleasure. It's why we can identify those things. Of course,
Sure.
we're pain averse. And if it's emotional pain, it's no different than physical pain. Nobody wants to be in pain. So we're always seeking to get out of that pain. And some of us just choose healthier ways to do that than others. And some of us make mistakes that, we end up not having any choices anymore on the other side of. For you, I know we're not going to get very deeply into the nature of your trauma, but it was something that you started having to cope with at a relatively young age,
Yeah.
as you've mentioned it to me, and something that was enduring through your formative years, if I have that correct.
Yeah.
So you started out really struggling. It's no
Yeah.
surprise that you would end up having to deal with anxiety and depression. What did you do, if anything, in terms of getting professional help with those things, in addition to some of the creative expressions we've been talking about?
Sure. Once I finally started working in corporate America, which I don't recommend, I actually had insurance. And so that allowed me to be able to get into therapy. And I was trying to find, I didn't really know what I was looking for, but I wasn't looking for a pill pusher. And that can be a problem in my area. I'm sure it's a problem everywhere, but I was trying to find somebody that maybe kind of came at psychology or psychiatry from a holistic point of view. And I wasn't sure if that was, if I was barking up the wrong tree. Is that a thing? And I found somebody, and I wouldn't say it fit all the parameters, but they were open-minded therapy sessions, and I just really appreciated that. And they in turn also gave me additional coping mechanisms, this on top of what I was already doing creatively. And those sessions lasted for a year and a half, maybe. And I ended up losing the job. The company I worked for actually closed. And so I lost my insurance and ended up not being able to go anymore. But I harnessed and took, and I still to this day use a lot of those coping
Did you
mechanisms that they
talk about
taught me.
your creative expression as a part of the therapy? Was that
We
something
did.
that was encouraged by your therapist?
Absolutely. And they were the one that helped me to realize that even at a young age when I was discovering music and also this passion for the paranormal, that I was creating my own escapisms, if you will.
Hmm.
And being that age and not really knowing that you're doing that, you might not be doing it in the most healthy way, which is avoidance completely, immersive as much as you can, and avoidance completely,
Hmm. It's
and
so common, though.
yeah, oh yeah,
It's
absolutely. And
very
I
hard to face your
uh,
pain head on and deal with it
sure,
directly. Sure.
I'll still do it now,
Sure.
but I know better. I'm like, okay, keep doing what you're doing, but you got to come back. It was being in therapy that told me, like, this is what you were doing. Here's how you could have done it better. You can't go back and tell 7-year-old self or 9-year-old self and teenager self, but here's how to avoid that in the future. And it was
Right.
just blew my mind. First of all, I was like, hey, I'm smart. I'm smarter than I thought I was. I can't believe I was doing that. All right, it wasn't the healthiest way, but it was actually some building stones or some stepping stones, if you will, to get to a healthier place. And
Mhm.
it's really cool that it was intuitive. I'm proud of myself, and I can count on one hand things that I am proud of myself about, and that's one of them.
Yeah. Well, good, good. Hang on to that. Those are the kinds
Yeah.
of things that we need when we're indulging in self-doubt. And
Mhm.
all of us that are creative have to deal with that little demon every now and then.
Yeah.
Nomar, you're talking about these parallel interests of music and the paranormal. And your bio said that your interest in the paranormal really was kicked off by a personal uh, encounter with a UFO at the age of 4. Was that just a sighting? I don't want you to tell me too much about that because I'm actually going to have you back as a returning guest for the next series, which is called Personal Paranormal Encounters. But I'm just wondering how, let's say, how colorful that experience was for you.
um, it was colorful in the sense of what I was enduring was happening at the same time,
Mhm.
and seeing something so beautiful while struggling and dealing with something so horrible. It was such a contrast,
So there
and I
wasn't
did
anything frightening or traumatic about the UFO encounter that you will tell us about.
no,
Mhm.
no, it was amazing. And coupled with that UFO sighting, and it might have been a little bit more than a UFO sighting. You'll find out when I tell the story, but
Mhm.
you can decide what you think. But coupled with that sighting, like a couple of weeks later, I also saw the Northern Lights the first time and only time. So very young, I knew that stuff in the sky was cool and different, and I should probably pay attention.
And that sent you on a lifelong journey, it seems, of wanting
Yeah,
to know more about the things that a lot of us wonder about,
yeah.
things that are not easily explained. And, the word paranormal really just means kind of around normal. It's like, here's the ball of normal, and then here's that
Right,
other stuff. I want
right,
that
right.
other
It's
stuff.
the atmosphere of normal, maybe.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it's crazy though, because it feels like it's in reach, because you see it, or people see it. People have these encounters and it feels like it's right there, it's right in reach. I'm just so close to whatever that truth is in this thing I can't touch or whatever.
Right.
But it's never around long enough, or it's around too long and it's too confusing. Like you can't win with the paranormal. There's always more questions than answers. In my opinion, there's no experts. As soon as you start hearing somebody say they're an expert, that's when you close your ears and stop listening. Now, there are experts on cases. Like somebody can know a case really well. They can know it up and down. I'll grant them that. But, nobody can define a UFO species or, any of that stuff. So I would take all of that with a grain of salt. It's a
Yeah, and I think the
vast
mystery is a big
area.
part of the allure as well.
Sure.
We're not interested in those areas because we're trying to satisfy some quest for truth. We know going in that we're not going to get the answers that we're searching for.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know if that's always true with researchers in the field, in all fields, cryptozoology,
mhm,
hauntings, and ufology. There are people that are looking for the truth and think they know the truth,
mhm.
and they have a different ideology about it, and that's not something I can relate to. So
Right. And so your way of responding to this world of things that don't have an explanation is to spend your life researching, investigating, and writing about. So a creative expression as a way of processing something that you don't understand, not
yeah,
necessarily traumatic, but mysterious and perplexing, to say the least. Your way of dealing with anything that you're having a hard time wrapping your head around is to find a creative outlet for it, which I
absolutely.
applaud and encourage all day long. Tell me about that end of things with writing and with podcasting. Your podcast, I Want to Believe, love that name.
Yeah, thanks.
I can't really remember where I've heard it before. But some of my
I can't.
listeners might find that to be a familiar phrase. I wish I had
Yeah,
that poster on my wall to this day, honestly.
yeah, me too. Me too. So podcasting is really just an extension of sound design and audio. And I kind of it's for me anyways right now at this point in my life, it's like the best mix of both. I can work on soundscapes for the background. I include a lot of different samples from television shows or whatever that might have to do with the subject that I'm talking about. So that's really just an extension of sound design. With the writing, though, the writing is different. Being a writer, it's a completely different process creatively. And, but mentally, it works the same in the coping mechanism. However, the stuff that I'm writing about, there are people behind those encounters. And those people are 9 times out of 10, in my experience, are struggling with some sort of PTSD, anxiety, depression. Uh, and their catalyst is this unknown. My catalyst was not that, but the symptoms, the things that we are trying to cope with are the same. So I don't like to just, especially when I'm talking about writing, I don't like to just take somebody's story and just tell it and that's it. I want to talk to them and I want to know the story from their mouth and get to know them a little bit. And I want to know what happened, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years before this encounter, and the same after the encounter. And I want to know what they're struggling with. And I try to convey to them that I'm a kind, non-judgmental ear, and your story is safe with me, and I'll prove it to you. If you give me a chance. What that can do for that person is to finally get that story out. Maybe it's been sitting in the pit of their stomach, and that's the thing that they do their things to cope, to not think about. And what else that story can do is for somebody who's sitting with that thing in the pit of their stomach, but they're not telling their story, maybe they can read it and not feel so alone, like at the very least.
Yeah. What does that curiosity and then the resulting writing process do for you?
For me, it's again, it's immersive. It's the only thing I'm doing. I'll start working on a project or start writing a chapter, whatever it might be, and 4 hours might go by and I don't even realize what's going on because I'm
Mhm.
so immersed in what I'm doing. And I don't always have to be hurting first to write. Sometimes when I'm hurting too much, I have trouble starting to write.
Sure.
So what I do when that happens is I'll start researching. Like, all right, let me get out of this. Let me start looking up something else, and it could be anything, something to do with the book I'm working on, or maybe my podcast. And I just need something to distract. And then if I'm not getting any luck with that, meaning I just can't get into it, because I'll punch something into Google, let's say, just to start, and I just see a whole list of links and it feels overwhelming, then I know I'm really not in a good place. Like if I'm starting to get overwhelmed by simple tasks. So that's when I know I need to kind of fall back on some of my other coping mechanisms, which is, shut the lights off. Now I'm in a dark room. As silly as it sounds, I need to put on like some kitty cat videos, getting my mind in a happier place. Sometimes before the cat video I'll meditate, and that's an interesting process in and of itself, and can be really helpful, and sometimes it's really frustrating for me, and so I'll move on to something else. But
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that process for you is therapy, and all of the creative expression, the expression is in the doing.
yeah,
Not so much in the result, not so
right,
much in the feedback you may be getting from the
right,
public as a result of the process. So for something like a podcast is episodic. It's on a schedule. You're looking at your stats. You're probably welcoming feedback from other people. It feels to me that that's a much more public expression than, say, writing or making music. Those are things you can just go disappear and do them. And the process of making a podcast, which I now know is pretty isolated, but it's much more about the result. Who's listening? What are they getting out of it? Here's a product that I've presented to you in all of its glory. What do you think?
That's a little different for me. I make my podcast, in my opinion, that sounds like nobody else's. Like I'm not trying to copy anybody. I look at it every episode as like a little, music project or something, like I used to look, at in my past. And, because these are long processes for me, it can be a 8, 10, 12-hour process per episode,
Right.
So it's all about that journey. What's cool is at the end of it, I've got this product that I can put out, and hopefully somebody else will enjoy it. But I rarely look at my stats. I don't care. Like I don't do any paid promotion or anything for it. I'll just post a link to it, and I really like the grassroots nature of it. If you listen to it, awesome. If you happen to find it, cool. If you happen to find it and you like it, maybe recommend it to somebody. But other than that, yeah, it's just another part of something I create and put it out there.
So you're keeping your day job and
No,
no,
this is what I do full time.
it is.
Yeah.
And yet you're not aggressively pursuing it as a way to increase profit or increase personal wealth.
The podcast piece,
Mm-hmm.
no, but the writing piece, yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, you and I talked about one of your books, Granite Skies, which
Sure.
oddly enough, I happen to have right here in front of me.
Nice.
It was a book that was recommended to me by a personal friend of mine who is a personal friend of Mike Stevens. And it is Mike's story that you're telling in this book. Pat recommended it to me because I had been reading a lot of stories that were about famous paranormal encounters. So the Betty and Barney Hill story and a couple of others. And after doing that for a period of months, what I found was these stories are compelling, but all the people I'm reading about right now are dead. I can't talk to them. I can't look them in the eye. I just have these words on a page. And there was something unsatisfying to me about that. And so I reached out on social media and I asked, does anybody in my personal network know someone, or have they personally had some kind of paranormal encounter? Because that was what I needed next. And Pat reached out and said, oh, you need to read this book. So I ordered it that day, read it.
That's awesome.
And it was exactly what I was looking for, because now I get to look Mike in the eye and have him tell me the story as well. But in reading the book, Nomar, you did that. And the way that you approached the writing of this book was so personal. I have really rarely read a book where the presence of the author was every bit as much a character as the subject that was being written about. It's Mike's story, but you are a palpable presence through that process. Your experience with hearing his story and even talking about the process of writing what you were experiencing typing during your interviews with him.
Yeah.
You described that in the book. I
Yeah.
found that I've been a writer in my life, and I found that to be endearing, and it scratched the exact itch that I had at that moment, which is to bring these out of this world tales into a world that I could relate to.
Sure.
And so I believed every word. I believed your experience with it. And so I'm wondering, how did that writing experience help you? Here's a situation where you're not necessarily sitting in an isolated place writing in an immersive atmosphere. You're interviewing somebody, you're typing as you go. Talk to me a little bit about that from the creative expression perspective.
First of all, that's probably the nicest thing anyone's ever said about that book. So thank you very
Oh,
much.
just being real.
I appreciate it. Second of all, yeah, Mike and I had 2 long form interviews. And when I say long form, like 2 4 hours each. And I didn't want just the highlights. I wanted everything. And Mike, going into it, we had many conversations. I was letting him know that I'll probably badger you for details and things like that. And he's like, no, that's fine. I'm very open to telling it. I'm a little worried about my family reading it, but
Oh,
but we
just
kind of
to
were
just
both.
to interject, because my audience doesn't know yet, Mike is a paranormal experiencer. So this is a book about his lifelong experiences with the paranormal, specifically UFOs, and possibly abduction experiences. So go ahead and continue. I just wanted to fill in that gap.
Yeah, sure. So when Mike and I first started talking about the book, like you were saying, I was very much a presence. I was like another character in the book.
Yeah.
I've never done that before. And I don't read a lot of books that do that either. And so that wasn't my thought process going into it. My goal is that I write like a novelization of somebody's story, meaning that it's readable and engaging. It's not just textbook and you get kind of like the heart of the story, but it's just a lot of blah, that's not fun to read, which is a lot of UFO books,
Yeah. Very
especially growing
clinical.
up.
Yeah. Very
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
clinical.
I want to give somebody something nonfiction, but fun to read like it is fiction, not making anything up, but just trying to paint a picture. So I did go into it with that mindset that, this is the novelization of Mike's story. And this is great because he's telling me everything. Well, as he started unraveling everything that he had been going through, and him opening up to me personally, not subject to author, but friend to unexpected friend, which happened in the process, I started to learn about what he was dealing with mentally, which is anxiety and depression and PTSD. And his catalyst, while different than mine, we could relate on that level.
Mm-hmm.
And what he was telling me wasn't just the story of what happened. I saw this light and blah, blah, blah. It was my marriage crumbled because of years of ongoing potential abductions. And I didn't know what to do. My daughter was suffering. I didn't feel like a good father. Like getting that type of information from Mike was powerful and sad. And during the writing process, I just found myself also sharing little bits about what I was feeling about what he was telling me.
Mm-hmm.
And but what's interesting, because when I was interviewing Mike, I was there with my laptop. I had a recorder going, but I was also taking notes. But then came the 2 or 3 or 4 months when I had all of this information without Mike, and that's where it got really immersive and was just me.
Right.
And but that interaction with Mike was the catalyst for getting involved in the book myself.
Was it
and
a conscious decision to include those personal elements? You don't often see the author. You don't often see the author in your reading experience. Was that a conscious decision, or is that simply the way it came out?
Yeah, that's the way it came out. Because I remember recognizing it. I had been doing it a little bit and not realizing it. And it's an early draft, so who cares? You know what I mean? It's, I would probably get rid of it if it were a regular book, if you will, in a future draft. so I probably did it earlier, but when I first recognized it, Mike was explaining the story, and I'm sitting in his office with him, and he's telling me this really incredible story. And to think back on it, like if there was a movie camera on us, I picture me just staring at him with my jaw dropped, you know, hearing the story. And of course, I'm picturing it in my head. And then while in that room with Mike, it was almost like a paranormal experience. It wasn't though, but it was almost like it where I just got immersed into Mike's story. And then I was in Mike's story. I was actually Mike. Mike was telling me the story so well that in the moment he was telling me, I was able to become him and experience what he was experiencing. And it was freaking me out. And so now I'm in my room, and, Mike and I haven't talked in, a month or so, because I have all the information. I'm just writing, and I get to that part and I'm just getting all excited again, like remembering being a part of that. So all of that was just coming out. And I was sending Mike pieces of stuff when I finished it, just to kind of get his 2 cents on it.
Right.
And that really spoke to him as well. And we just liked how it sounded and how it worked.
Yeah. You also include some of the more well-known stories that we were talking about a few minutes ago. And, this audience is it's not necessarily a given that they are paranormal enthusiasts. It happens to be an area of great interest of mine. But a big part of why I want to do the next series and why I want to talk to people who are engaged in this world is to get a fresh set of eyes on these subject matters and engage people just in the process of thinking about things that they may not normally spend more than, maybe you're scrolling through your social media feed and you've clicked on some clickbait, or you see a headline and you spend a couple of minutes on it and that's about it. Or maybe you're surfing and you spend 15 minutes, pausing on an episode of Ancient Aliens or something. And that's the extent of the amount of time you think about it. But my experience has been the more I read other people's stories and see the similarities that they have, no matter where in the world they were or when in the world they were, the similarities, particularly of the abduction experience and the sheer volume of stories that exist, tell me that this is something that deserves some attention. And for me, my creative expression is to bring these stories to ears that may not normally hear them. And your creative expression, it seems to me, is similar with this book. I don't imagine you wrote this book so that only people who were already interested in the subject would read it.
Right.
I know you wanted to give Mike a voice and you wanted to tell his story, but then once the story is in book form, what was in your mind about how you wanted this book to exist in the world and what you wanted it to accomplish?
We decided to release it during the pandemic, and that's obviously not something any of us ever have experienced before.
Right.
And we didn't know if that was the best idea. And it was also the best idea. You had a captivated audience, but it was still a thing that nobody had tested. So I wasn't sure how successful it would be, because writing a book, first of all, it's what I do full time. And I need to live. And so I was hoping to sell some copies even through a pandemic. And I come from I don't know how to say, maybe you can help me. What's a better way to say poor? I don't know. Maybe I should just say poor. I don't know.
Broke ass.
I come from a broke ass background. I come from not a lot of money. And
you come from humble beginnings.
Okay, that might imply that I am better off now, which is not the case, but I come from and am still in humble beginnings. And when I'm thinking about what I want to spend my money on, entertainment wise, especially through a pandemic when all of my speaking engagements were canceled and there was no money coming in from there, my book sales had plummeted, for like the first part of 2020. So there wasn't a lot of money coming in there. I didn't think it was the most sensitive thing to do to put out a product to try to make some money. That's not the only reason I put a product out, because like you were saying, I want Mike's story out there and all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that was part of all of that was part of the decision making process. I actually have been with some professional publishing houses, and I at the time was currently under contract with them, which means whatever I write next, I have to send to them first for first right of refusal. Well, they liked it and they wanted to put it out. So this is during the pandemic. I'm like, okay, this might be a good way to make some money. It's coming through a publisher, so that's really cool. So I started talking to them about money, and what they could offer me, because I'd already put out a book through them. That was a couple of years ago. Surely, even at the lowest paying job at the worst place in the world, once in a while, hopefully after a year or two, you might get a raise. I mean, that doesn't really happen a lot for people. But I was hoping that they followed like a business model like that. Not the case. They're lovely people. It's a lovely company, but they couldn't really work with me monetarily. They tried a few things and I wasn't into it. And bottom line, they also, on top of the monetary stuff, which is a big deal for me, I didn't have final approval for the manuscript, for the cover, and even the title. And at the very least, Mike and I knew what we wanted for the cover, and we at least know what we wanted for the title. The manuscript, I can understand editing,
Those things actually are intrinsic to the story.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't like how that felt, because I was like, all right, if you can at least give me this, let's do it. And they're like, we can't. I'm like, okay, then I'm saying no, and I don't think they're used to people saying no.
So how does that work when you're under contract?
I didn't know. I had to ask them, and that was also very awkward.
Yeah,
because I had just gone back and forth over the course of a few days, and this is all email and all that good stuff. And during that time, I'm talking to Mike about everything, because I'm like, hey man, because I would assume for Mike, like, that's a big deal to have a publisher put a book out about your story. And the author is like, I might walk away from that. He might have a problem with that.
yeah.
And I wanted to make sure.
Worth consulting him on.
Sure. And he really appreciated that. But I'm like, of course, like, anyway, so he was in 100% agreement. He's like, hey, if they're not doing the money right, I'm with you. If they're not even letting you have final approval on the title, dude, I'm with you. Walk away. And I'm like, if I walk away, it might be another, because I was under contract for 2 more years. I was like, it might be 2 years before we can even put it out. And he's like, I don't care if it's 5 years, as long as it's done the right way. And I'm like, amazing. So that's when I said the no to them. And I sent the no, and then closed my eyes, like, oh, what are they going to say? And they were cool, obviously, because it's not like 2 10-year-olds talking. It's adult and a business.
It's business.
Yeah. So they were like, okay, we understand. Sorry, And so I finally had a sigh of relief with that.
Did they just release you from your contract, or just for that?
Not exactly. They didn't technically have first right of refusal. I did, so I wasn't sure if in the wording of the contract, if that was going to be a big deal. So I emailed that over, and they were like, listen, dude, we love you. You obviously love this book. Do what you want to do. We don't care. And I was like, oh my God, thank you so much.
Decent and civilized.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not the sort of things you can often expect from the professional corporate world.
Right. Which is, I'll tell the story, but I'm not going to badmouth them. They are beautiful, lovely people,
Yeah.
I told Mike that, and he couldn't believe it either. And I was like, do you want to put it out this year? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, all right, I'll start the process. I had self-published before, and that's a whole other learning curve.
Right.
And I had learned, each book you learn a little bit more. Being with publishers, you also learn a little bit more about
but they are very different processes.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad to say I'm in a place now, like I don't care if my books are on Amazon. I was using Amazon, but Amazon is almost solely responsible for the mom and pop bookstores folding. And thank God they're making a much bigger comeback now. But Amazon has a process where they not only, will list your book there and send it out, but they also manufacture it. And you can buy author copies, so I can have stock myself if I'm going to a conference or something, and I pay well below asking price, to
Right.
have those author copies. And that's what I did with Granite Skies. And I had done that with a couple of other books, but even with Granite Skies, I put it on Kindle. There's a hardcover, there's a soft cover, and all that good stuff. But I didn't feel good about it. But that wasn't for me, it was for Mike's story. So the next book I did after that, I didn't put it on Amazon. I only utilized their manufacturing service to be able to have stock of the book. So it's a print only book. Can't get it anywhere else except for my store and a couple of local bookstores. And then I'm hoping that my next book I'm completely weaned off of Amazon, and I'm going to use a local manufacturer. The only tough part there is that it'll probably be double the cost for the book. So I might be looking at $6 a book or something like that. But I think it's worth it. If I'm going to pay even half of that money that I'm giving to Amazon, I wanted to give it to someplace local instead.
Yeah. So you're saying this is what you do full time, and you're needing to make a living, but at the same time, you're standing on principle. That is not an easy thing to do in this day and age with, the larger corporations wanting to swallow up the smaller ones. So
I do not recommend it. I do not recommend it. Living off of what I do plus principle, not to mention how many
cat videos do you have to watch to get past that feeling at the end of the day?
It's a lot. But morally, I feel I can live with myself, and that feels real good.
What are you working on now?
Right now, I'm working on something really fun, and I didn't know it was going to explode the way it has. So 2024 is the 10-year anniversary of the first book I ever put out. And that was put out by Schiffer Publishing. It's called UFOs Over Maine. And that was like when I saw my book at Walmart. I was like, what? I've made it. Yeah. Why am I poor? I'm still poor, but I made it. So 10 years on, 2024, you know how books take a long time. So I'm working on it now. I thought I was going to write a new intro. I have a colleague in the field who's been in the field over 40 years, and he's originally from Maine. So I'm like, that would be perfect for them to write a foreword for the book. And I would insert a couple of updated cases, some new cases, and then the rest would be the original 2014 book. I made the mistake of rereading the 2014 book. I'm like, no. I can't put this out again. It's 2014 voice. It's 2012 voice. You know what I mean? It's not
you're not that guy anymore.
Right. So I decided to rewrite the entire book. Wow. And it's been amazing because, the research skills over the years. So now I'm finding stuff out about these cases that I wrote about and haven't looked back on. I'm finding that there's some more info here and there. And so I'm able to rewrite it and put more narrative into it from witnesses. And it's been an amazing process. I'm really excited that it's going to be chock full of all this stuff. Now, to add on to that, my 2018 book, Otherworldly Encounters, which a different publisher put out. You know how the publishing process goes. Sometimes they cut some things here and there. So while I am proud of that book, it's not everything that I gave to them to put out. So finally, in 2024, I'm finally going to be putting out the UFO book about UFOs in Maine that I've always wanted to, and it's just super exciting to me. And I hope it's a tome. I hope it's a Stephen King, The Stand types tome. And it's everything you could ever want to know about UFOs in Maine ever. And it will also be an engaging read. It's not a textbook. It's not indexed. Each chapter is a really fascinating story that you'll love to read,
So you've got your big anniversary edition of the first Maine book coming up, where you get to say anniversary edition, new updated chapters, and put all those hot seller words on the cover. And then you'll follow it up with the and another thing version, which sounds like there's even more to tell than was in the first book. So that's super exciting. And those will be self-published, or are you working with a publisher on that?
No. I'm all set with publishers.
So where can the people that you have just completely made enthusiastic fans of buy Granite Skies and learn about these new projects when they become available?
The old standby, The old reliable is Google. You type Nomar Slevik into Google, it's not a common name. So you'll get all my stuff. You Google Nomar Slevik and Granite Skies, it's going to bring you right to the book. And if you want to actually help me continue to make my living, it's slevikstore.company.site. And that's where all my stuff goes. And I love stickers and I love pins, so there's a bunch of little things like that I make that are up on the site. Yeah.
That link and any other that you want to include will be in the show notes. So if you're listening and you're interested in reading Granite Skies, which I can personally recommend, it's an easy read and it's a captivating read. And the person that it is about will also be a guest on this podcast in the second series, Personal Paranormal Encounters, where I will also have Nomar come back and tell us some of his personal paranormal experiences. So go ahead and check the show notes. I want to thank Nomar for joining me today. Nomar, thank you. I just thank you, just like I said I was going to do.
Thank you.
And having thanked Nomar from the bottom of my heart, I also want to make sure that I specifically thank him for his bravery and his transparency. He shared some very deeply personal and intimate things, and I am very grateful that he was willing to do that, because I do believe that when we learn we are not alone in our struggles, the first step toward healing can very definitely be found just in hearing somebody say something that maybe you haven't been able to say. So thank you, Nomar, for that as well. I really genuinely enjoyed the conversation. I hope you did too. I hope you found something to inspire you and to give you some hope. And I hope you want to check out some of Nomar's work, whether it's the podcast or the book. And speaking of books, Nomar's going to rejoin me in 2023 for the Personal Paranormal Encounters series. And he will also be joined by Mike Stevens, who is the subject of his book, Granite Skies, who will share the story that is actually told in Granite Skies about a lifetime of being an experiencer in the abduction phenomenon. So you'll learn more about that if you haven't spent more than a couple of minutes paying attention to what's going on with many, many, many people. I think you'll find that conversation fascinating. And if you don't yet want to read Mike's story for yourself in Granite Skies, after you listen to that, I'm fairly confident you will. Please check the show notes for more information about how to find that book and to learn more about Nomar and plug into his podcast, I Want to Believe. For my parting thought today, I'm going to read you a little poem. This is a poem that was crafted by a delightful gentleman named Tyler Not Gregson. And in keeping with today's conversation, this particular selection is called Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep. And it reads this way: Be gentle, always delicate with every soul you meet. For every single morning you wake up, there is someone wishing silently and secretly that they had not. I want to share with you that if you are struggling with thoughts of suicide, please know that the world is better with you in it. Help is available. Here in the United States, it's really as close as simply dialing 988 or call a friend. Whatever you do, share your struggle. If you do have a history with struggling with either thoughts of suicide, have lost someone to suicide, or just are an advocate for mental health in general, I recommend that you visit Project Semicolon to learn more about how you can be a part of a community that's really trying to do some good in the world. A semicolon, by the way, is used when an author could have chosen to end their sentence but chose not to. So in this particular context, the author is you, and the sentence is your life. So visit Project Semicolon to learn more about that. In 2 weeks, we'll be back with more. So until then, I want to say thanks for listening. Come on back, and I'll see you next time. Cool Gray in Studio A is a fine-tuned services production. It exists for entertainment purposes and is not intended to be used as a sole source of information or advice on any subject. Find and follow this podcast at coolgraystudios.com.